about how many in the community see this national holiday and the civil rights movement and believe we've achieved the dream. And fear, or they might fear because Dr. King is no longer with us, that the dream has died. And so what I want to know is, why is there such a focus on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and not the civil rights movement? And how do you think that helps and hurts civil rights movement forward?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Dejeune. When Dejeune presented me with this question, I thought it was profound, and it gave me an opportunity to think about, why do we focus on Martin Luther King and this idea of a man who was nonviolent, peaceful, and the story that, you know, just across the board, he as Melanie pointed out, wasn't radicalized and was just easy to work with, and, you know, everyone loved him. There's this idea now that he's just so loved, but as Melanie pointed out again, he was enemy of the state, he was enemy of the country. So, you know, why now is it that MLK is so palatable? So I think the focus on MLK instead of the movement, just focusing on his image, is because they, and this proverbial they, get to paint this story that is just accepted and agreeable. And we just pick it up, we learn about it as early as elementary school. But that's all we learn. We learned that Martin Luther King marched, he marched for us, he was a civil rights leader. We never really learned what civil rights is for many of us until we actually get to college. So I pulled this quote from Professor Eddie Claude Jr. from Princeton University. And he asserts that there has been this societal acceptance of a standard story that is palatable. It starts with the development of the NAACP, then jumps all the way to Brown versus Board Education, and then jumps to student sit-ins, and then the March on Washington. And that's what you learn. And that's what we're to believe is the entirety of the civil rights movement, and that's just not true. So it becomes a very linear story without nuance and without complexity. I think that's important. It also doesn't acknowledge the muck of the work. It doesn't acknowledge the horrors. It doesn't paint this picture that, or it doesn't display the actual violence that went along with the civil rights movement. Also, it doesn't honor the fact that Martin, towards the end of his life, as again pointed out, was so conflicted with the messages that he pushed. So he was actually in a space where, you know, with the rise of the Black Panther Party, with, you know, Malcolm's work, and, you know, many of the students that participated in the sit-ins were moving down to a more radical view. I think Stokely Carmichael, he was a part of the student nonviolent work, and then he was one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, because, you know, they started to see that this is not necessarily the movement. And Martin was actually, Dr. King was actually, you know, really reflective on that, and, you know, he struggled with that towards the end of his life. So I think lastly, the focus on the man instead of the movement, it would lead us to believe that the movement died. Martin Luther King died. He's gone. So if we focus on him, we're not, and we think the movement died with him, we are no longer engaged in the work. We've just accepted that it's a complete story. The oppressive, just the oppression is over, and that we live in this, you know, world where we have access, and we're no longer oppressed, and that's just not true. We know that. And Dr. King knew that, and I just wanted to, what's my last word? And so the work continues. Thank you.
For that lead-in, Ashley, because I think that's really something that's important for all of us to think about. I really love the idea of they. I'm always thinking, who is they? Someone even put a shirt out that says, who is they? But we all know that they, right? They're doing this, they are doing that. I heard that they, right? And it almost is a push for us to create things that can be idolized, so that you just look at that. and you don't look at the underbelly that may not be as pretty so that you can deal with the real issues that are going on. There's going to be a constant push to be told that no, it's just wonderful, everybody got along, and then once Martin Luther King came, and then there were some marches, and now we're all equal and everything is okay, and yet we know that it's not. And many of us suffer every day because they tell us that no, equality is here, and yet we live under the oppression of understanding that it is not. And that oppression can bear you down consistently. Every day that you go outside and you're told that you are free, and yet you're pulled over because you're brown. Every day that you walk at a store and you're told, oh no, you have money, you can shop just like everybody else, but you're followed through it because you look different. We continue to have a struggle that we must address. And so if we only look to this one leader as if he was the savior, as if he was the king, then we'll continue to struggle. We're all saviors. We're all kings and queens. We all have a duty to this legacy. And so speaking of which, when you talked about the Black Panthers and all of that, I thought, well, you trying to leave LaKiesha in? Did you see my notes? But let's bring in LaKiesha McDonald. And I've had an opportunity to have some conversations with you and talk about really your upbringing in LA and how the Black Panthers were, a big part of your life and how they were a positive influence to you. And so my question for you is, how do you see the movement manifesting itself today?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Super honored to be here, super honored to be a part of this conversation. So I'm a 70s baby. I was born in the early 70s. And I was born in South Central Los Angeles. The first probably 6 or 7 years of my life was spent in Los Angeles, in this bubble of my neighborhood. Everywhere I went, all I ever saw was, I didn't go far, by the way, but I always saw Black people. That's it. I always knew that Black was beautiful. I shopped at stores that were owned by Black people. I went to schools where our teachers were Black, our principals were Black. My neighbors were Black. There was very little integration, right? So being brought up in that, and let me tag this on. This is kind of how the Black Panther thing ties into that, is because there's a lot of things that Black Panthers did that people don't talk about. They had lunch programs where they would be at the parks, and especially in the summertime, like you could go up there and they had like arts and crafts, and the pool would be open, and they would provide lunch to you, and you kind of hung out with Black Panthers, not the ones that you all, the images that you see on TV, right? I'm talking about the ones who genuinely cared about their community. I'm talking about the ones who poured into their communities, right? And so that's what I grew up with. Now, I didn't know a whole lot about Martin Luther King until I got probably into the 7th and 8th grade. And I didn't really have an appreciation for him until I became an adult. So when you grow up in a situation where all you know is your culture, and you're proud of that, and you stand and you fight, and you see people walking the streets with guns to knowing their rights so that the police can't really infiltrate, right? You get these dynamics and you're very powerful, and it's very hard to understand someone who is very opposite of that. And so what I learned as an adult with Martin was that he kind of was that balance that our culture needed. Because you can't just be all radical, right? You can't just be all so pro something that you're not able to see the benefits of partnering with people that don't necessarily look like you, that can also help you to move and to push the movement. And so I got a great deal of respect for him as I became an adult and as I started going to college and learning more about his movement. How it relates today, when we look at someone like a Colin Kaepernick, right? Are you guys with me on that? Are everybody familiar with what happened and how that went down? That's a peaceful protest, right? That's happening in our very present day. Whereas years ago, had we not have been able to really understand the power of a peaceful protest, then we wouldn't understand what it is that Colin is doing and the sacrifices that he is truly making for the same issues that we were talking about in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000s to current. So I have this respect for this peaceful protest because what it does is that it allows us to continue the fight for those who are oppressed. When you have a peaceful protest, it allows people to come and be a part of it that maybe don't look like you, don't sound like you, aren't from the same places as you, but the cause is still the same. And so even though there's been great progress, what Colin has showed us by making the move to say, you know what, we're not going to just allow people to continue to be oppressed. We're not going to just sit back and say, hey, you know what, you can shoot a black man, it's cool. Right? We're going to be so pro the progression of everybody and equal rights for everybody that I'm willing to sacrifice everything for that. And that's what Martin was willing to do. He was willing to sacrifice his dignity, his pride, what other people thought about him. Could you imagine what people are thinking about you? You're letting people spit on you. You're letting people physically harm you. You're turning the other cheek, whereas what's our first instinct when someone hits us? Don't lie, don't sit there, y'all want to fire back. Right? The great control. The knowing what your purpose is. The only way you can do that is to understand what your purpose is and why you're here on this earth. And so I think that when we look at Colin, we're seeing those similar things. And then just one last thing, if I could just tag this on. There was a certain type of unity that Martin was able to do that I'm hoping Colin is able to do. It wasn't just a me. And we're living in a very me society these days. We're living in, yeah, that's happening to this black man, but because you're a superstar or because you're very well off or you're in this prominent type of lifestyle, that you get disconnected from the cause, that you get disconnected from the overall benefit of why he's doing what we're doing. So I think that's how it kind of makes it relevant for today. Did that make sense? Did y'all catch that? Okay.
Did you hear what she said? There's a pin that I want the panelists to put in your thoughts because it looks like we're going to have a little bit of time, and that's that idea that before the civil rights movement, there were hordes of communities that looked like me, with teachers, with doctors, lawyers, and so forth. And kind of what that did when we had the civil rights movement. So hold on to that, panelists. And I also wanted to think about the idea of how you were talking about Colin's peaceful protest and how you see the pushback on that protest. Well, not now. I'm watching a game. I'm trying to relax. Protests are always made to believe that you should not be doing it. Keep it out of my face. I don't want to have to see that stuff. I don't want to have to deal with that right now. I just want to see if the Cowboys are going to win. But real protests are trying to make you uncomfortable. We want you to look at that game and think, what is he doing? Are they really shooting people? Should I get involved? Yeah. Do I need to call my city council, my sheriff's department? Do I need to have a conversation with my senator, my congressman? Should I be writing letters to the president? What should I be doing as a person who has the ability to support change? It's really important that we all realize that we all have a responsibility in this. And it may just be the responsibility if someone says, yeah, Colin should be doing that, that you say, no, he should. And we should all be supporting him in that. And so now I'd like to round out kind of our conversation by bringing Glenn in. And we had an opportunity to have some conversations, and your words reminded me of the song, Keep Your Eyes on the Prize, Hold On. And it's meaning to continue to move forward. So my question to you is, Dr. King laid a foundation. Where do we go from here?
Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Everyone has said it, but it is really an honor to be able to speak out and open about the betterment of people, to discourse of being able to share our thoughts, and hopefully, have questions. And, we have so many different perspectives of what Martin Luther King was and still is. And I was listening to Destinee, who is just a couple years younger than I am. And how she was moved. To give you an example where we're coming from as far as breadth of experiences, she was moved by Obama being president, the first African-American president, to tears. And I was sitting there with my dad, my family, and my dad, and we were watching it, and this is why we're meeting today. You know what the first thought that came to my mind when they announced that he would be president? What do you think? I turned to my dad and I said, do you think he'll make it through the year? What kind of thought is that? On one of the most momentous occasions in the universe, I'm looking at my dad, is he going to make it through the year? And that's why we're here today. Not to indict anybody, not to point fingers at anybody, but once again proving that we are, as Martin Luther King said, we are all one. We are all people. We have issues that we have to work together. And Mel said, well, we have to do the right thing. Well, what is the right thing? We've muddled everything. What is good, what is wrong? A real easy definition of how we treat each other, as Martin would say in many ways, is if you want to be treated that way, that's a pretty good start. If it feels good where you're not damaged and you don't feel humiliated, or if you would treat someone the way that I would want to be treated, that is one way of looking how we ought to treat each other. Many times he said we're confused, and one of the things he said was, in his eloquence, he could say things so eloquently, but it would cut you to the bone. Before I read that, I was just thinking, the thing that, where do we go from here? We have a lot of challenges. And the thing that always impressed me about the work that he did is that he spoke truth, and people don't like to hear truth. But in the midst of speaking truth against things and people not being treated correctly, he knew they were intentionally, deliberately trying to damage his family. They blew up his home. They kill people that are close to him, or you don't kill them, but you beat them so badly that you wish you were dead. But in the midst of that, he stood on principles, and he still taught all over the world to show that even though you're going to try to intimidate me, he stayed the course. And there's many times each day, even here in MJC, that we speak things that are uncomfortable to people. And have we come to the position where we are comfortable being uncomfortable? Are we feeling that unease of the way people are treated? And if you don't, you can practice it. You can get into a place, get into a group of people that will change the way you think, that will alter your perceptions of some things we say we never do. But we hang around someone like, it doesn't matter what it is, someone else, we found out we ended up doing some of those things. Because we became aware of new thought processes, new ways of bringing it to pass. And so as he mentioned, where do we go from here? I can't find any of the ones that I want to read. But one of the ones that I wrote down, I guess I didn't write it down. Here it is. Nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. There have been a lot of things that people have said, well, I did it for, we've done a lot of bad things, even in the name of God. We've gone to war, we've killed in the name of God, we said it was the right thing. We should attack these people, we malign people. But what goes from here is that we are all educated. Isn't that amazing? The rates of people in college has just continued to blossom. One of the most primary events that should happen, as King said over and over again, that we reach some type of critical thinking, that we understand and we hear what you're saying, but what they're saying, is it in truth? Does it have logic? Does it have merit? Is it supported by data? Because if we are swept away, then we can believe anything. Just a few years ago, they said if you're a black man, that you're not really a man. This was a Supreme Court justice. These are supposed to be our brightest, most revered people in our administration as far as law. I would dare say they were wrong. What do you think? But see what I'm saying? Unless we critically think, it doesn't matter who's in office, it just so happens to be Trump right now. But we've had other presidents that have said many things. But did we critically analyze what is going on when they maligned a certain group of people? That is what King wanted us to do. And we are now in this room, as we are each day, every minute of our lives, we either are an accessory to a crime or an accessory to a positive legacy that draws the people in our environment to a higher level. We're responsible. You're an accessory. We can no longer say, oh, well, I'm not Mexican, I'm not black, I'm not white, it didn't bother me. At some point in our life, we must realize that we are all responsible for our immediate sphere of influence. And that's what he wanted to take. One of the last things I'll read, and he said something, it was in his speech, I Have a Dream. He said, not to be tranquilized by gradualism. And I took that to mean, not to be so happy now that we've made more money than we ever have. We're on track, we're in school now. You know, even with financial aid, we made more money than we ever did, right? And you start here, because a lot of us up here, my peers, not necessarily in this room, we now have a house, we have nice cars, we have money in the bank, but some of us have forgotten where we have come from and the people that we were before we got all these things that are supposed to make us happy. I got a nice car, but I don't sleep with my car.